And so now we have Angela Melitopoulos, a good friend, artist in the time-based arts, realizes video essays, video installations, documentaries, and sound pieces since 1985. Within her research projects, she curates exhibitions and symposiums. Angela and Mauricio Lazarato's writings have been important to a lot of us, and we're glad that they maintain this practice of writing, as well as political alliances across Europe. She's called, sorry, I'm lost now. Angela also studied fine arts with Nam June Paik. Her work was awarded and shown in several international film festivals, exhibitions, and museums, including Generali Foundation, Berlinale. Also recently, The Life of Particles was shown in the Berlinale. She has also shown at Manifesta 7, at Centre Pompidou, Whitney Museum, Haus der Kultur in der Welt, among other institutions. We were fortunate to meet again in Taipei, where Angela and Maurizio's film, Two Maps, was screened, which is part of the visual research project, Life of Particles. Two Maps is an interview with anthropologist photographer Chihiro Minato. What the film does, in our understanding, is that it threads together critical relationships between psychogeography, the subjecthood of contamination, and permanent impossibilities of mapping. The films and its research expresses modernity in Japan as a complex between rational thought, radiation, and animist traditions. Melitopoulos will also link post-Fukushima Japan with Guattari's visit to Okinawa, in this sense, moving in and out of time, as well as rhythm. We will join her later in discussion when she calls upon us. Thank you.
Hello again. And thank you, Natasha, to have specifically make this focus on Two Maps, which is part of the research that you could maybe see partially already on the first day on Felix Guattari. And Felix Guattari as being one of many, I would say, not too many, but a few, let's say, who were thinking about the relation between geography and psychiatry and psychology. I'd like to start off with a few other considerations that actually I thought would be interesting to mention here, and that have been somehow central to my work, ideas that have to do with the essayist filmmaking, video making, mapping. I think that I will just announce these points as, you know, like separate from each other, but leading and coming back maybe then in the screening of two maps. And I will also show the link between this interview, Two Maps, to the installation, The Life of Particles, and that parts of the interview are used. So I will start with a sentence that has been very important for me. That is a sentence of Gabriel Tarde. He's a sociologist, beginning of the 20th century, has been important also for the work of Deleuze. And he says, the panoramic illusion is less potential than the logic of the detail, or the other way around. The logic of the detail has more potential than the panoramic illusion. Let's say, identifying in each panorama a trick, something which resumes and which gives us the idea of an overview, of a perspective towards what we see. While when we see the logic of the detail, then we have to say, so says Gabriel Tarde, that it is a higher logic, meaning the logic inside of a phrase is stronger than the logic in a discourse. Because in a discourse you have many phrases, and therefore, thus, more contradictions, because the logical bound, which is maybe in one phrase, has a higher potential and a greater strength. So you can maybe identify the logic of the detail with the idea of nonlinearity, which is what I will actually, or what is what I'm doing in my work, like in my essayist work, if you want to say so, because of my strategies of editing that are actually going vertically and horizontally at the same time, meaning layering, producing layerings, and at the same time are being concerned with sequencing. Gabriel Tarde was one who would be very important in developing the critique to science in the beginning of the 20th century. Why? Because what he says is against reductive abstractions that are actually acting in the panoramic illusions. If you would like to make it very simple, look onto something which can be called chaosmotic, maybe non-ordered forms of molecules. You can look on the beach and you will see many, many small particles. Now, if you would like to make a deductive law out of this multitude or chaosmotic mass of particles, you will have to find what is similar from one particle to the other particle. And this similarity will give you what is abstraction. I say this and this characteristics of the molecule is similar to this one, therefore we can say the definition of these molecules is drawn through these characteristics of similarity. Meaning the critique was that there is a reduction in that observation happening, and this reduction of difference is exactly what produces the illusion of the panoramic. Okay, so this is some ideas. I think it is pretty clear that we can very well see what a film that is composed out of details allows us to link to, and let's say in the opposition to some other strategies of narratives where there is the panorama is produced through the elimination of differences, but by then the creation of maybe an abstract or a reductive principle. So I think also what is interesting to think or to mention is the relation between abstraction and extraction. There is a kind of a link between the potentiality of abstracting, and what can be gained in terms of extracting. And there we are already in this notion of deterritorialization. This is, I guess, one of the principles of this whole discussion on territory, on landing, maybe not territory, but landing, or leaving deterritorializations towards something which is a gesture of landing. I will now again go a bit back and look about a form of extraction, abstraction that is not purely logical, but that is an aesthetical paradigm, and that is connected to poetry also, because I will just mention the moment of the invention of an essay. The essay is a form of writing that was actually created, let's say, in the 17th century around, or after the French Revolution. If I would like to focus on this example that is given in a post-colonial study about the Balkans in Europe, and the Balkans being the first inner colonized, interior European colonization processes. And this book is from Maria Todorova and is focusing on the exchange of letters between the British Empire and its secret agents sent to the Orient that were actually mostly, first of all, politicians, because they were asked to fabricate reports about this land far away that was not yet mapped in the way. So before there was military travel reports about topographies of places, the state of roads, villages and towns, and the impressions about local populations. Alphonse de Lamartine, Gérard de Nerval, Gustave Flaubert published in France a new type of a travelogue that was not fixed to an external reality, but to the subjective world of the author. With this form of essayistic travelogue, some of these poets and authors took on the role of a special emissary of foreign affairs. In the book Voyage en Orient, Alphonse de Lamartine described how, after a very long day of riding on a horse during a hot day in the Serbian summer, he took a nap in the shadow of a strange wall. When he woke up from his nap, he was scared witlessly. Skulls stared at him. And he writes, "When I was awakening from my sleep, under a tree in the hot sun of a Serbian summer, I was dead afraid because I saw a row of skulls staring at me." So, if you want to say this moment is very important, because what happens is that he's described an image. The image is the one of Cela Kula. Cela Kula is a kind of a war memorial that was constructed by the Ottomans to scare the Serbs. It was composed of many skulls, and it was a kind of a wall made out of skulls. It was not very big, and but Lamartine describes it, but he is describing his scare at the same time that he's describing this wall of skulls. I discovered that the walls, which are supposed to be built of marble of white stone, were composed of regular rows of human skulls. These skulls, bleached by the rain and the sun and cemented by little sand and lime, formed entirely the triumphal arch which now sheltered me from the heat of the sun. So he describes this moment of awakening as a second of horror. His physical state, the heat, the tiredness, his napping and waking up facilitate in his narrative the image of the staring of the skull. His description of an affright convey the bugbear of the cruel Ottoman. His awakening wake in the interest of a Western European public, which is the coming public of newspaper readers in that time, about the populations in the Ottoman Empire. The wall made out of skulls in Niš is not very big, but the political effect of the essay travelogue of Lamartine was very grand. His writing entered the status of a testimony about the horrors of a war, in that he himself did not participate as a soldier nor as an officer. His travelogue was composed for a political discussion for the interested press readers in Paris. Many travelogues were composed that way by a noble class of travelers that earned their reputation by writing at the time in that a new political theater in the French Republic was born. A new form of a public that was entering the political debates, and it was this public that later should facilitate political decision-makings of its governments on foreign affairs in Southern and Eastern Europe. The poet and writer Lamartine became a few years later a member of the Académie Française, and then later on the foreign minister of the French Republic. In a speech for the parliament, he pleads finally for a European protectorate in the Near East, and that no unilateral intervention of a single Western government should be made. Maria Todorova points in her book to the quality of imagination that is triggered by these essays and that builds the public opinion of a Western European public in the 19th century about the so-called Balkans. This kind of authorship, she says, must take into responsibility for the momentous Western European foreign politics in the Balkans. So you see, I wanted just to mention this notion because we talked about poetry also, and we talked about machines, and we talked like 2 days ago a lot about the machine, or I was talking about the understanding of the machinic in Guattari's term, in that such an invention is a perfect example. So in that way, these machines are also deterritorializing and reterritorializing machines. I think, I don't know why, but I thought maybe it's interesting that nevertheless that we should, remember that deterritorialization is something which starts a process of becoming. First of all, is something which is defined as unmarking a territory. Like, for example, deterritorialization is an act of war also, like in colonization, taking away the cosmologies and stories of a land or of a place. For example, the Spanish conquering the Aztecs, eliminating the symbols of belief, etc. Okay, so I guess deterritorializations can be seen in different manners, can be seen as scientific methodologies, such as reductive systems, can be seen as poetic interventions, in that the word in German, which I really like to use, is a word that is coming out in the study to Bakhtin. It's called Bildbahnungen. It is like facilitation of images, that what facilitates the image to appear. But as I was also mentioning 2 days ago, also Freud's invention of the libido is a huge deterritorializing machine insofar as it has replaced the moment in that a certain industrial evolution and a certain distribution of communication in terms of what was there, such as, for example, when publics are born through new media, but also through all kind of inventions of machine, which are producing relations, so producing a distribution, that the Freud's invention was to try to centralize again, to create a paradigm of centralization. And I would also say that this is for me now an interesting point to see what characteristics of centralization and what characteristics of decentralizations these machines can have. Good, okay, I will stop here and I will start the screening of 2 maps. We have normally these installations being shown as a display with some formats. You can see it here. It's very simple, and you see the interview and the images today on 2 projectors, while I have to say that the combinations which might occur here now between the 2 fields are just accidentally. Okay. Yeah, we can take the first image, please.
Donc, oui, on commence avec cette carte. Ouais, parce que, bon, je garde deux cartes qui sont parues tous les jours dans les journaux japonais. Le premier, c'est la carte parue dans ça, c'est le Tokyo Shimbun, le journal de Tokyo d'aujourd'hui, le 20 octobre. Et on voit la carte de taux de radioactivité. Et ça, c'est tous les jours, depuis 6 mois. L'autre carte, c'est la carte qui est parue dans Japan Times. C'est un quotidien en anglais, donc destiné pour anglophones et pour les étrangers. Voilà. Et quand on voit les deux cartes, la différence est évidente. Le premier qu'on voit tous les jours dans les journaux japonais, il s'arrête là, c'est-à-dire de l'épicentre. Donc, Fukushima Daiichi se trouve ici, 50, 100 km et 200 km à peu près, là, au sud. Mais de l'autre, il garde toujours la même carte, même dimension, qui couvre au nord jusqu'à Aomori, au extrême nord du Honshu, et au sud jusqu'à Shizuoka. Voyez. Donc, cette carte, le zone affiché est plus limité, Et dès le début, Japan Times a fait cette carte et qui sont gardées, mais toujours.
Et la différence, il est autour de quelle constitution
300 km, en disant 400 km. À peu près 400 km. Tandis que l'autre, ce qui se limite 300, mais l'importance c'est le visuel. Vous voyez, c'est évident la différence. La carte qu'on voit, c'est seulement ici.
Et les mesures sont les mêmes.
C'est le même.
Les mesures sont les mêmes.
C'est le même. Et quand on dit Fukushima, c'est ça. La province de Fukushima. Vous voyez? C'est ça. Donc, c'est une des préfectures plus larges par exemple, par rapport à Tokyo ou Chiba. C'est très large de l'est et qui est étendu de l'est à l'ouest. Et au milieu, il y a une montagne. C'est important. Donc, le taux de radioactivité est bien différent entre est et ouest. Oui. Par contre, il n'y a pas de montagne ici importante vers sud. Donc, il y a une sorte de couloir, un corridor, que l'air peut passer facilement vers sud. Et sur ce corridor, il y a une autre route principale. Il y a 2 autres routes, Tohokudo et Jobando. C'est ce qu'on prend si on veut aller pas seulement à Fukushima et au nord du Japon. Oui. Donc, le Fukushima se trouve vraiment au milieu entre Tokyo et au nord. Et comme vous savez, le nord était toujours important dans l'histoire du Japon, et même aujourd'hui, c'est un des centres productifs de haute technologie. Donc, je pense que ceux qui regardaient cette carte depuis 6 mois, et l'autre regarde et lit cette carte depuis 6 mois, ils ont forcément la vision différente de ce désastre, géographiquement.
C'est par rapport à Tokyo.
C'est par rapport à Tokyo. Et là aussi, c'est par rapport à Tokyo. Mais l'important, c'est que le vent ne va pas seulement à Tokyo. Le ciel a son idée, n'est-ce pas? Donc parfois, le vent souffle du sud vers le nord. Et c'est une des raisons que différentes parties, on a trouvé des vaches, la viande de vaches contaminée, parce que ils étaient nourris de foin qui vient du nord. Et à l'époque, personne n'a pensé que par exemple, à plus que 200 km, le foin au nord, au nord, 200 km au nord de Fukushima, le foin peut être contaminé. Et ils ne sont pas mesurés. Voyez. Donc, comme quoi notre vision est conditionnée par exemple, par la carte, tout simplement par la carte. Enfin, en revenant à cette carte, moi je pense que, au moins au Japon, la géographie devient psychologie. Même géographie et psychologie. Puisque les gens qui vivent ici pensent que on est à l'abri. Mais le vent, l'atmosphère ne déplace pas ne déplace pas géométriquement. Le vent ne s'arrête pas à 20 km. L'air ne s'arrête pas à 100 km. Donc cette carte concentrique, qui vient évidemment de Hiroshima, cette carte, qui conditionne notre psychologie, tout bête, je peux dire. Le jour, il y avait un typhon, il y a à peu près un mois, il y avait un typhon très important qui a remonté ce typhon a remonté du sud, traversé pratiquement tout le Japon et sorti par comme ça. Et même le jour lendemain, j'ai vu cette même carte. Là, je trouve qu'il y a un grand écart entre la pensée raisonnable et une sorte d'animisme visuel. Cette carte, ce genre d'imagerie devient notre icône. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que grâce à cette carte inadaptée, on a pu s'adapter. Parce qu'on sait, et on ne sait pas, c'est que l'état de savoir n'est pas une sorte d'hybride entre savoir et non-savoir. On sait qu'il y a le taux d'activité, par exemple à Fukushima, est plus élevé qu'à Tokyo. C'est vrai. Donc on sait qu'il vaut mieux pas vivre très longtemps. Mais on s'adapte. On s'adapte pas seulement à l'environnement, mais on s'adapte à l'environnement intérieur, notre psychose. Il y a l'environnement naturel, mais aussi il y a l'environnement intérieur de notre cœur. Et petit à petit, on s'adapte de l'état d'inquiétude. Et je crois qu'on a plus ou moins apprivoisé. On n'a pas maîtrisé le central, mais on essaie de maîtriser nous-mêmes. Je crois que ces lignes parfaites c'est-à-dire que ligne, enfin ce cercle parfait révèle le fonctionnement de bureaucratie et donc le politique. Le cercle est politique, tandis que la géographie est la vie. On ne vit pas, on ne peut pas vivre à la façon de cette ligne. C'est intéressant. Oui, je commence à réfléchir à l'origine de ces lignes. La ligne abstraite n'est pas faite par un agent abstrait. Il y a quelqu'un qui fait. Il y a quelqu'un qui calcule, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a quelqu'un qui calcule l'effet de la peur et l'effet de cette peur peut donner le résultat négatif par rapport au gouvernement actuel. Peut-être. Bon, ce qui s'est passé à Hiroshima, bien délimité pour compenser, c'est-à-dire ils ont bien délimité le sphère économique, c'est-à-dire résolution économique de la guerre, et en dehors, on n'en parle plus. Je crains que ça peut arriver à la même chose ici. Par exemple, à Hiroshima, c'était la carte, une des origines de procès qui a continué jusqu'à l'année dernière, que les habitants qui étaient à l'intérieur de certains kilomètres qui a reçu les subventions d'État, tandis que les gens qui sont trouvés d'autre côté de cercle géographique, qui n'ont pas reçu, mais ils ont reçu par la pluie noire.
I will show shortly a short excerpt also from the installation work, The Life of Particles. The installation is technically similar to what I have shown 2 days ago. It's the same display. And you will see the way how this, this is the second part of The Life of Particles. It's a kind of a travelogue that approaches Fukushima from Okinawa via Hiroshima, via Osaka, Tokyo, Kyoto. It never arrives in Fukushima. It arrives actually with Chihiro Minato in this analysis of the cartography. But you can see that there is a kind of approach from the post-war history of Japan, from the loss of the war that was in the Battle of Okinawa at its highest dramatic loss for many, a very brutal event, the Battle of Okinawa, where the most famous image is the one where you have women jumping off a cliff, that were identified always as if the Okinawan and the Japanese soldiers and populations were so much involved in the imperialism of Japan that they would rather suicide themselves than become prisoners of war or but that's entirely wrong. That's not true at all. There was an entirely different story. I cannot go to the detail of it, but it has to do with a kind of double colonization of Okinawa. Okinawa is very important for the history of Japan, and so is Hiroshima. And our travelogue was approaching this problem, why the nuclear in Japan was embraced for such a long time as a technology, and why this belief in technology actually could facilitate, if you want to say so, facilitate what is actually Fukushima. Then I will show a little bit of that. This is a different format, of course. It's a preview copy, but you would have had this kind of display in the installation. Maybe we can lower a little bit the light so you can read it a bit easier. Or you can leave this on.
S'il y a une différence entre catastrophe et un accident, c'est que le catastrophe révèle tout ce qui était caché au tout niveau. Niveau économique, niveau politique, peut-être culturel. C'est ça la différence. Un accident, peut-être, mais une partie. Le sphère d'accident est limitée. Tandis que le catastrophe, il n'y a pas de limite. Pour moi, c'est la grande différence entre accident et catastrophe. Ça, c'est le catastrophe. Le catastrophe révèle toutes les phases cachées, même dans le temps, pas seulement dans l'espace, mais dans le temps. Vous savez, en 1954, un bateau de pêcheurs était gradué à Bikini. Et le mouvement antinucléaire était enflammé au Japon. Donc les États-Unis sont inquiétés et ils ont décidé de faire une sorte d'opération déjà pour calmer l'opinion japonaise, mais aussi de vendre le nucléaire, pas en forme arme, mais un autre forme, qui s'appelle peace. De 1958,
Okay, I
il y
think we
avait
can
une
stop
grande
here.
exposition
This like installation with this part of the life of articles is 80 minutes. So this is altogether a very long research. And now to come back to the two maps, I'd like to, start the dialogue with Natasha and Vivian to actually talk to get a few connections, because I think that territory, or it's a very there's a very interesting. I'm always all the time thinking about this definition of what, like we had the blue Earth in the first day as this visual concept of the planet. But when I think about the word Earth, then I of course think actually about the Earth as a memorical device in that sense. And I think a few of our discussions have like met here. So I'd like to invite you to start this dialogue, because they have seen the work, of course, and I guess there's a few questions.
I'm sort of stuck somewhere between concentric circles, the perfect circle that Chihiro talks about, that allows for bureaucracy to make judgments as to who is affected, who is contaminated, who does not need to be accounted for, to use Rosalind's words. The centralization and decentralization tendencies, the concentric circles of the nuclear, and in that sense, the imperfections of the blue Earth image, to say, that it's not about that sphere, but about the subterranean forces that activate and animate it.
Yeah, I think this, is so shocking to have the fact that the stupidity of a bureaucracy that apparently is not able to have a bit more of technological knowledge at stake than to just take bluntly the circle map of Hiroshima and put it over Fukushima, and then along that have this major decisions of who is and who is not to be evacuated. This is, of course, unspeakable in that sense for whoever has to leave really his environment and his house. It's it has, of course, a reality of measuring and seeing maybe, okay, the radiation is behaving entirely different. On the one hand, this is like the very, bad end of a mapping series that could be maybe be added to this great map so that we have seen before. But it's interesting to see also this relation to the visual and the seeable and the invisible in that sense, and as if this when I was showing assemblages and I was showing this work on Deligny, that he has traced the itineraries of these autist children in the landscape and therefore created a mode of interacting on the virtual level. That means to know where they will go and therefore they can communicate together. This is and the questioning that is there between the eye and how you trace something. I mean, this questioning apparently, I don't know, it doesn't take place, but I think that the visual as a also maybe even in this considerations on the assemblages, on this concept of Guattari, that has also the idea of a configuration inside that is a visual consideration. As a configuration is figure, so there is some kind of a visual level in that I think has to be questioned. And I think one of the ways maybe to kind of, for me at least, questioning and producing this kind of whatever layerings, horizontal, vertical lines is, I think, the idea of nonlinearity. And as nonlinearity has a moment in that from point to point, if you want to say so, you would have to at least pose this question where to go and what level you will go next. You could go as a sequence, you could go in another level. So for me, for example, it's very important, this is all somehow, that sequencing has a specific form of forgetting. Like, as you know, if you read a long story, then you might forget the beginnings of it. It might come back as a surprise and has a kind of ritornelle inside. But let's say it has always a potential to kind of overcode and overwrite that has been before. So a linear form is a specific form of forgetting, while also this kind of vertically layerings has certain other forms of forgetting. So I think this installation works has like two sequences, like Ciro Minato and François Tosquelles about the institution of psychotherapy, and this other form of verticality that is trying to play this different line in a sense. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your questions, but...
I'm also in a train of thoughts with what it is that you've presented, and maybe one not so different from what Natasha's already said, but perhaps with a slightly different emphasis. The work and also the introduction, in that I wonder if maybe the crux of it or something that is heavily underpinning it is the seeking from a position from which to be transformative, or and I guess I sense that in the introduction, where even the poet becomes the administrator of a military and colonial and centering system, and also within and that is brought through with radiation as well as something which so in the case of Fukushima, where from the administrative center of Tokyo, where Fukushima is a place that is viewed at a distance, that needs to be traveled to through cars and trains, and yet the imaging that doesn't imagine the way that traveling to and from is actually part of what the catastrophe is.
Mm-hmm. Well, Chihiro's notion of the distinction between catastrophe and accident has been developed further in the interview. Later on, he's talking about what the catastrophe does is reveals all what was hidden, like in time and space, as he said. And I think one of the challenges is, of course, in this film project was also to deal with this notion of radiation as an invisible notion, as something which is omnipresent, or which could be interacting with each gesture of the everyday life, what you eat, where you go. It was actually like that when we were in Japan. And to kind of think different modes to deal with this invisibility in a sense. And I think one of them is of course, to do with the notion of place that can become something, for me at least, that would, if we take it as not like how we order place in the globe, which has to do with this logic of the detail and logic of the panorama again, that there is maybe a chance, if we take it seriously, not to do these arrows all the time, to presume things existing in the invisibility outside, beyond the horizon, so to say. The beginning of the life of particles is actually in Okinawa, and we had a very nice sequence also because we were in a place where activists were fighting against the construction of a new land strip that was constructed for the American military and on the coral reefs, and they would also tell us that spaces are actually sacred, and that there is a kind of utopia that has to do from what comes beyond the horizon with the waves to Okinawa, and that is the notion of there is no metaphysical beyond, it's just a spatial beyond. So, for example, if someone dies, it's not that he is going into another world, but he's just like disappearing from the horizon. And so it's a spatial notion, which is a different notion, culturally embedded in Okinawa. I think, yeah, I don't know if this is, but I think the notion of Guattari's existential territories again against like territoriality, existential territory, which invites us to think space, place, not just within geography in that sense, but which would invite us to understand our existential territory in means like everything that we use in terms of abstract machines or concepts, everything that we are consuming in terms of flux of and every kind of he has this schizoanalytical ideas about how we can understand place insofar existential territory as a notion of production of knowledge that might be then the hope that not would produce the same kind of failure of the panoramic, because it's a failure of the panoramic in a sense, right? For me at least.
I'm going to ask one last question before checking in with the audience. So if you have questions, please be ready. But I wanted to maybe know a little more of the relationship between deterritorialized being and this sense of sort of non-ordered particles of life. So how can we read the two in this paradigm of visuality, a sort of sense of non-ordering as well as deterritorialized belonging?
All right. The word, if you take it from like Guattari Deleuze, it's always de and reterritorializing. This is at the same time happening in that sense. And there is this idea of cosmos, which I would associate with your like definition of not ordering. But of course, in cosmos, there is already a kind of agency happening that is not between not non-order and order, but which is like a moment of event that takes place, and in that you can actually articulate yourself inside. In that sense, you are in a process of producing something. It's not that you're just subjected to some kind of an order. So Guattari was at least thinking that this moment of chaosmotic or the cosmos have to do with creation and the notion of creation. And this notion of creation is actually a potential, but it is simply very quickly also repressed insofar as it would also probably not be fixed in its results. So it's an experimental moment. In that sense, it is what he calls this chaosmotic, like he's of course talking about children, or he's talking about rituals and ritornels in that, or the creation, which was, it's a system that is not yet described. I mean, the description of it is not yet done. So that kind of moment occurs not just in the arts, but it occurs also, for example, when you fall in love, when there is a huge potentiality that comes suddenly into existence, and then you can, as he says, either choose like the ordering principle of chronologically putting it into a life that you had before, or you can maybe, try to take it into something new. So the basic question is always there, how does the new come into the world? I mean, this is for them the basic question in that sense. So, I don't know. I think, if you would like to be positive, then we would have to, of course, embrace this idea of what can happen in such inventions, in such invention of other machines that are not following entirely, if we want to use the critique on science very bluntly, like on a reductive system on reducing in a very, external observer towards, like what is to be controlled and so on. If you don't want to follow this kind of principles, and if you would like to use more other principles or other inventions from like the arts or from aesthetical paradigms, then we would have a lot to do, and we would need a lot of people to do that. So,
Yeah, to me, there's this one point in assemblages where there's this statement of not emptying the world of its intentionalities, and the fact that there are more subjects than humans, and when those two come together, somehow also...
Yeah, I mean, this is like Castro's inversion of the principle that subjectivity is not located in ourselves, but actually it's dispersed everywhere. I mean, this is a very, like, as if, and he says, like our understanding from objectivation, if you want to say so, is emptying everything from its intentionality, which is like, associated with the paradigm of scientific processes in a sense.
So we are running short on time, but if there are any questions, then we could take one. Okay, so we are now going to move towards the last presenter of the day, introduced by Vivian.